Good afternoon. It is Thursday, May 26th, 2022. I'd like to call the annual update meeting of the Harlan Municipal Utilities to order. I need an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Michelle, aye.
Terrell, aye.
Reset.
Michelle, aye. Okay, and next item is the TFR tariff meeting.
I will get Chris Nagel on here. He is going to take control and do their presentation. Can you hear us, Chris?
I can. The process of sharing my screen now. Can you see it?
Yep.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the Harlan Municipal Utilities 2022 Annual Transmission Revenue Requirement Update Call. Just a quick overview of today's presentation. First, we'll have a brief description of the purpose of today's meeting, followed by a little bit of background about Harlan Municipal Utilities, an overview of the formula rate template that Harlan uses in calculating its annual transmission revenue requirement. Then we'll touch on a comparison of the 2022 ATRR versus the 2021 ATRR. And then finally, we'll have an opportunity for anyone to ask questions.
Can you guys all hear okay?
I'm sorry?
No, I was making sure everybody here could hear.
Great. And so the purpose of today's meeting, first and foremost, is that it's a required part of the protocols that Harlan abides by when calculating its transmission revenue requirement each year. These protocols require that the ATRR is updated every May, and this year's ATRR and the attachment H template was posted on May 2nd, 2022 on the SPP members related posting website. This meeting is also part of that update process in which HMU is required to host a meeting, allow for questions, and just generally discuss the annual update process. So this is a brief timeline of the various deadlines that are outlined in Harlan's attachment H protocols. You can see that May 1st was the deadline to post the updated ATRR to the SPP website. May 31st is the deadline for this call. And so today being the 26th, we are meeting that deadline. June 1st is when the ATRR that we'll be reviewing goes into effect in the SPP rates. So the cost information that you see on today's call will be placed into SPP rates in just a few days here. July 1st is the deadline for any information exchange requests that might come into Harlan. August 10th is the deadline for the responses to any of those requests. October 10th is the deadline for any preliminary challenges that may be issued with it for any specific issues with the ATRR that we view in today's call. Then January 16th of 2023 is the deadline for Harlan to make its informational filing at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And then finally, March 1st is the deadline for formal challenges to be submitted to FERC for any issues that go unresolved during the preliminary challenge process. So a little background on Harlan Municipal Utilities. Harlan serves the city of Harlan, Iowa, population about 4,800, provides electric, gas, water, and telecommunication services to city residents. Harlan is governed by a 5-person board of trustees and it owns approximately 13.5 miles of 69 kV transmission lines. The line runs from Avoca, Iowa, where it's interconnected to the NIPCO transmission system to the southern edge of Harlan, Iowa. And Harlan's membership agreement as the transmission owner was fully executed on in July of 2015, and Harlan transferred functional control of its facilities and included its ATR and SPP rates in October of 2015. Harlan's formula rate, which we'll be reviewing today, was approved by FERC in September of 2015, and the initial or the inaugural ATR was included in SPP rates in October, as we previously mentioned. Any questions so far before we jump into the background of the Harlan formula rate? So Harlan uses what's called the cash flow template to calculate its annual transmission revenue. This template is typically used by organizations that predominantly finance investments with debt or have little or no equity or proprietary capital in the capital structure calculation. And the cash flow template includes or recovers costs related to the bulleted list you see here, but they include big items like transmission O&M expenses, an allocated portion of overall administrative and general expenses, as well as taxes other than income taxes, an allocated portion of the debt service, so that would be the principal and interest on any outstanding debt that our Harlan has, an allocated portion of any bond premium or discount costs that go with bond issuances, and then an allocated portion of what's called the margin requirement. And so Harlan's margin requirement was approved by FERC in September of 2015. And on your screen now is a comparison of this year's annual transmission revenue requirement calculation as compared to last year's, so 2021, transmission revenue requirement calculation. And you can see in the variance column that the vast majority of the line items in Harlan's attachment H, or annual transmission revenue requirement calculation, have decreased year over year. And the very bottom line number, the revenue requirement, is down just under $10,000 year over year. And that, of course, is the culmination of the calculations above that line. So I'm gonna, that actually concludes the information that we have to go over. Our next section is the questions. So I'll do this on the screen for just a moment. If anyone has any specific questions about costs, you go to the annual transmission revenue.
Yeah, so reference this slide, the 2021 column, two questions. One is, what impact did the polar vortex have on that cost? And then what is are there inflationary factors brought into 2022?
So in answer to your first question, I would need to look into it further to see exactly how the polar vortex would have impacted O&M. However, that is typically the area that would be impacted by a storm event in the event that any additional or extraordinary operations and maintenance costs were incurred during the storm restoration. And can you repeat the second question?
Yeah, so for 2022, what inflationary factors, if any, were factored into this estimate?
So the one thing that I will say is that the costs that you see in this comparison are all actually incurred costs. So that 2022 column, that refers to the rate year at Southwest Power Bowl, or SPP, that these costs are put into effect. The costs that you actually see were incurred in fiscal year 2021. So this was prior to the higher levels of inflation that we're seeing right now. Next year, it is possible that we'll see some impacts from inflation in the revenue requirement calculation.
Okay, thank you.
I'm glad to take any other questions that you may have, but on your screen now you'll see some contact information for Ken Weber, CEO of Harlan. If you have any questions after today's meeting, feel free to reach out and email. You can also follow the link on the screen to get a copy of the full attachment page or transmission revenue requirement calculation to review those as well. And then finally, next year's meeting will also be held in May, so May of 2023, and that'll review the 2023 transmission revenue requirement calculation that's based on 2022 data.
Just a couple of comments for the general public and for our new CEO. What this relates to is MCR, which Mr. Nagel is a partner in, is a consulting firm that we have retained to help us work through this attachment H process through SPP. And so it allows us to do some cost recovery for the actual operation of our transmission system and the fact that we take delivery of their services over that transmission system. So it is a direct benefit, usually $250,000 in revenue to HMU each year because of this process. But MCR is retained on an annual basis to take us through this whole process, conduct the meetings, do all the filings for us. With regard to the polar vortex, the only impact to the electric utility of the polar vortex would have been generally higher electric sales. And so the higher sales would have been more power across the transmission system, potentially additional revenue of some type related to that additional power that was purchased.
Thank you.
Yeah, so since you brought that up, so one final question really for you, Ken, is so we have this WAPA forecasted increase for 23 of 15%. Does that impact this at all? Will we expect increased revenues across this power transmission line?
It won't be increased revenues, it will be increased wholesale costs, which will be actually passed on to our customers through an electric cost adjustment, which is calculated based on wholesale costs. But this is based on the amount of energy that's transmitted, not the amount of revenue that's actually generated by that. So, okay.
Any other questions? I would entertain a motion to close the annual update meeting.
So moved.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Michelle, aye.
Sarah, aye?
Seibert, aye.
Reese, aye.
Sheldon, aye.
All right.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, the annual update meeting is adjourned. And we will now call the regular meeting of the Harlan Municipal Utilities Board of Trustees to order. Again, I will look for approval of the agenda.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Roll call.
Michelle, aye.
Sarah, aye?
Reese, aye.
Sheldon, aye.
Seibert, aye.
Who seconded that?
I did.
Randy?
Randy.
Sorry.
He's in a hurry to vote.
No, you stuck in here all the way and screwed it all up.
Jumped right over me here.
Okay, so we will look for an approval of the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of the May 12th board meeting, the abstract of claims number 1213 in the amount of $875,040. And the upcoming board meetings, June 9th will be an electronic and June 23rd irregular.
I'll make that motion. I'll second.
Roll call.
Michelle, aye.
Sarah, aye?
Seibert, aye.
Reese, aye.
Sheldon, aye.
Okay, item number 4 is update of the electric SCADA software for the electric distribution system.
Yes, basically what you have before you, what it amounts to is two options. The SCADA that we have is dated software. It was at a period of time running on a outdated server running on Windows 8. We had multiple disk drives plugged in, trying to add additional storage and everything else. It was moved to one of our virtual servers. We had some issues with it regarding clocking and timing. It would kind of reset the SCADA. So the two options being considered that once the approval's made, our systems analyst, Oxen, and the vendor, Utilcode, will make the best recommendation whether to put this back on a standalone server, or if we can overcome the recycling issue with the virtual server, to leave it on the virtual server. But this gives us the flexibility to work through both options and come up with the best solution. But the high dollar range is to put it back on its own independent server.
The virtual server issue was network time protocols, a setting in there. And so when they did monthly maintenance, the clock would fall back out of Central Standard Time and go back 1 hour. So Oxen Technologies identified that, and they pointed the network time protocol to the proper URL, so that shouldn't happen anymore.
So what are you looking for from us?
We're looking for board option for the board to give us the option of going up to $22,550 if we can't get the new system to operate on the virtual server. If we can get it to work on the virtual server, it's just software only. If we can't get it to operate on the virtual, then it would be up to the $22,000, which includes a new standalone server.
Is this part of, is this a budgeted or non-budgeted item?
It would not be budgeted.
It wouldn't be, because it would have, if it had been budgeted, it would have been within the metering. It's our wholesale metering, basically, at our interties with NIPCO and that type of thing. And it's something that has come up over the last year. Like I said, we've had days where it wasn't registering anything, and so we've had some problems with the metering and such. So.
Is this new software too, Culver?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. The server application is probably not going to work, because that's a 30-inch long unit, and network operation server rack is full. So I don't know where you would put that. You would probably want to look at the tower application. Unless it works out to keep it on virtual server.
And there's nobody out there that can tell us that?
Excuse me?
There's nobody out there that can tell us whether it works?
Not until we get the new software to see if it'll run on that virtual.
But the writers of the software aren't able to say yes it will or no it won't?
Their recommendation was to put it on a standalone or put it on a rack server to get it off the virtual server, because we've had different issues with it this year, and it really messes with our MISO and with the billing and all that stuff. So that's why they wanted to do that, because we were having issues. But if all the issues are resolved, then we can run until we get newer equipment for the substation, which at that time it would be a budgeted item.
So you're saying we don't need to do anything at this point, or we need to do?
As long as Oxen's fix is the fix-all, then we'll be fine. But if it continues to happen, we need to do something.
So at some point, the plan is to replace this capability. It's just not in the budget right now. We think we have a solution. We just need to see if the solution pans out. If it doesn't, then it comes back to the board with questions already answered as it relates to rack space and optimization of it, and then we can have a more deliberate board decision.
Correct.
The end game is to do the software upgrade of the SCADA system.
So it's new software versus what's already running?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, the software that's running now is out of date. It won't update, won't give us the power management reports if we updated. It's only for Microsoft Server 2008, can't go any higher, so it would be a good prospect to get the software updated. So you can put it on modern computer server.
So has the electrical department talked to the finance committee about if there's funding available outside of the budget for this option?
No, because we just put this together and it took longer than expected to get the information we needed.
Okay, what I would recommend is that it goes to the finance committee to look at what's in various accounts to make a determination on whether or not this is the priority within the utility, that specific utility for this item. But that's just my recommendation.
But in any case, we're gonna have to spend $10,000 on the software, correct?
Correct.
Because the current software is out of date.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think the electric utility is probably in a position financially to not have
Yeah,
this.
It seems odd to me that if the software people will tell you it needs to be on a standalone server, it would seem only logical that you would put it on a standalone server. Attempt to operate it in a way that the people that are, it's hard to go back to the software people and say, hey, something's wrong or it doesn't work when you didn't follow their recommendations. So I'm not entirely keen on saying it could cost $6,000 or it could cost $20,000. It seems to me that, if you want this to run properly on the long term, then it's probably better if you just make the investment to do it right.
Correct.
Which, if I'm looking at this correctly, would be about $19,850.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm looking at the right one.
I remember the last software upgrade was in 2016, and it was around $20,000. But SCADA systems are like any other systems. They keep getting updated and need to be upgraded.
Did staff already check with Monty to see if there was money? I know Jim just mentioned the finance committee, but I thought maybe,
I did not even do that yet, because I was trying to figure out what exactly the route we were going to go.
I thought maybe you guys already talked.
I didn't even talk to her yet.
Yeah, what I would suggest the finance committee goes, the board writ large, is a current status on all the accounts relative to what is or isn't available. So that the board can ask more nuanced questions as opposed to, is it in the budget or not? Is it something that...
Right. Yeah, I don't disagree. If the money is there, it seems like the appropriate move would be to spend the $19,850 and get it handled for, handled correctly.
However long that software is gonna last.
Right. At least you have the ability to go back to the software people and say, hey, this doesn't work. We followed your recommendation. So is it something that can last until the next board meeting?
I think it will. I mean, we haven't had an issue for 3 weeks now.
Yep. We'll all knock on wood here.
They just did maintenance on the virtual servers yesterday. They all rebooted. So if the SCADA server rebooted and it's still working, that's good.
Okay. Well, why don't we bring that back at the next meeting, and hopefully we'll have a plan on the funding at that point instead of just blindly approving it. Okay. Item number 5 is the lease for the postage machine.
Jamie, you want to give them a brief overview on that?
no, it's pretty simple. There's our current postage machine our lease is up on that. So we have the choice of either a 60, 12, 36, or 48-month lease for the replacement.
Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
I reviewed the agreements. They're not very long. I didn't get a chance to review the different pricing or anything on those different lengths of leases.
The only thing that I had to add, and that concerned me, was, are we getting a new postage machine? Because I don't think I got an answer for that.
Yeah, I replied to your email that we were just replacing the
Okay.
current one.
You're just gonna keep the current one?
Yeah, you possibly missed it.
Okay, yeah, if you're just gonna keep the current one, the only requirement they have is that the one you have now be returned within 30 days. So if you're keeping the same one, there's no issue at all.
No, we're not we're not keeping the same one, we're replacing it with a newer model.
Okay, so you just need to return it within 30 days.
Yes.
I've done that at my office, they'll just send you a box, and it's no big deal. But that was the only thing I found in there that's of any concern that you should know about.
So, Jenny, how often do you update your postal machine, postage machine?
Our last lease was, I believe, also 4 years, so whatever you guys approved on here is how often we're going to replace it.
What's your preference?
Doesn't matter to me. The longer the lease, the cheaper the monthly
payment.
fee is.
But then we end up with a dated piece of equipment, right?
Possibly. It still works.
Generally speaking, state of Iowa agreements only go about 3 years anymore. They used to go 6, and then the last 5 years, state of Iowa codes really trended down to 3-year agreements on anything.
I don't know if I like the price of the 3-year.
Yeah, I'm kind of in favor of 4. We lasted 4 years last time without incident or without issue, and that's,
I think the 4 to 5 year. Do you think you could have gotten a 5th year out of this machine?
Oh yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. The lease is just up, so they replace it automatically anyway. So this is just the new amount.
You're on mute.
On a personal note, this is not a legal review. I would just recommend that the lengthier, the cheapest. You know, I've had an office for 20 years, same type of situation, and you know, it's not going to be a problem with the machine being ineffective or becoming less effective. So, in my experience.
if someone would like to make a motion for a 5-year,
I guess I'll make a motion for the 60-month lease.
I'll second that motion, not a motion.
I can make it a motion if you like, but
Okay, roll call vote, please.
Michelle, aye.
Terrell, aye.
Seibert, aye.
Reason.
Sheldon, aye.
Okay, we have a 5-year lease on a...
And that is already budgeted because we already had a machine.
Okay. Okay, item number 6, water rate adjustment discussion only.
Right. We've been talking about this over the course of the last few months, adjusting rates with the water department. Basically, the proposed changes have to do with, we've adjusted the cost, what we believe is a more reasonable cost for providing the different types of metering services. It's basically an update of labor, equipment, materials, and the meters themselves, which continue to go up in cost. So what you see are the basic service charges have been increased, particularly in the interruptible side, but then also we've increased it for the 2 to 6 inch considerably to better reflect the cost of providing those types of services, which are usually the larger users. And then we've also added fire line, $25 a month. We've always differentiated dedicated fire lines, but in the past, we never billed for the $25 a month charge that had been previously discussed. So this would bring that charge in line. The other part of it, in our current situation, we have tried to make the rates more reflective to promote conservation. You know, quite frankly, at least through the conservation months that we've had to look at the last couple of years, as well as until we get the new water resource developed. Conservation is going to be a key part of the ongoing operations of the water utility. And so the new rates are proposed basically to promote conservation. And, these can be adjusted when the circumstances change, but we believe at this point there's a benefit to a structure along these lines for promoting conservation.
So I have a couple questions. So are we raising the rates across the board because we are trying to increase capital investment in water? Are we trying to, what are we seeking to accomplish by raising the rates?
Two things. The outstanding items in the water department, of course, are the cost of remediation and the cost of litigation, which are nearing $800,000. The premise being that we hope that eventually to recover some of those costs through the current ongoing litigation, but that's an uncertainty. And so we need to make sure that we have rates basically to cover those costs. The other part of it is to get closer to our actual cost of production, which in the past years, when you look back at the current rates, the 516s, the 661s, basically didn't even cover cost to produce that water. Our cost to produce those additional gallons does not decrease with increased number of gallons. It actually remains the same or goes up because of the additional chemicals and other items required to produce that additional water.
Yes, I have a question. This is, the residential increase for the average person is rather insignificant. But it's obviously going to be most affected by our largest customers. And have we actually had any kind of dialogue with those customers about this and about the future?
The two largest users right now, Monogram and Essentia, we have had conversations with them about current and future. And if the economic circumstances are right, if the gas and water are available, both have plans to expand in the future. But there's no fixed date on that. There's no guarantee that they'll do it here versus an alternate location. It's just basically conversations and discussions at this point in time. But we have not, so far all of our conversations regarding the increase in rates has all been internal. So.
I point that out because if I was a business person and I had a budget that I was trying to meet and all of a sudden the utilities went up 47% on me, that would be a shocker. That would be the kind of thing that I would have wanted to know well in advance and have been a part of. So I think it's important that we do reach out to them and make sure that there's a plan in place that keeps everybody functioning correctly. If any of our vendors suddenly jump the price by 47%, we would be blindsided by it. I don't think it's fair that we would do that to somebody else either. So
we did have a meeting originally set up this month for Essentia, but it's been pushed to June.
So I would offer that we need to make sure we look at what it is that we're trying to accomplish by raising the rates. We deduct out whatever funding that's sitting out there that's undefined or ill-defined, and then we come back and we look at the rates from that perspective. I would also suggest that, to David's point, I think we need to make sure that we continue to offer our commercial customers a rate that's favorable over competitors, meaning whether it's rural or Shelby County or whatever, so that we don't end up with a utility taking action that causes an adverse economic impact to the community. So I think there's a point in which I think the figure is it costs us $7.72 to manufacture and distribute 1,000 gallons of water. The fact that we charge our commercial or our interruptible and commercial customers less than that right now is a problem. I'm not sure that it needs to go up where it's at right now, but as long as we are charging more than what it costs us to manufacture it, and then we're also looking to see why are we raising the rates, what is the economic or the factor we're trying to eliminate or address. I think we then go back to the community and the business community and the residential community, and we have a solid justification for any changes that we make. I would also suggest that we take into consider not just the water rate, but we look across the various other utilities and make sure that if we have the ability to relieve pressure in another area, we do that almost simultaneously with what we do in the water utility, so that we don't end up having undue negative impact on our customers.
When were you proposing to make this rate adjustment?
Well, like I said, we've been talking about it basically since the first of the year. This would, the way it's set up right now would be to discuss it or take action on it in June. And then the question would be whether to implement the new rate in July or some later date, more in line with the end of the conservation, which would be October.
If you approve it at the next meeting, the soonest you can implement it is August 1.
I feel like there's obviously an adjustment that has to be made. We can't continue to sell water below cost, but I do think we need to look at it. This would be the kind of spike that, as a business owner, that would be difficult to accept. So I think that additional, we probably need to.
These rates are higher than what you brought to the committee, the water committee one, right? Because the sheet we had was, there were lower rate increases percentage.
Originally,
Yeah.
that was what
We met, in April or whatever.
right. Yeah. They're higher than, and the ones that we had taken to the committee originally were closer to the currents. In other words, we still were low on the high volume users. And it didn't have the service charge adjustments for the 2-inch to 6-inch. And it was closer in line to, I think it was around $250 for interruptible. And the 2 to 6-inch service costs were close, more in line with the 1.5 inch, the $50 to $55 range. So. And then the rates were all significantly below what the proposed is. Just the more we studied it, the more comparison we did to costs.
Because the initial service charges we're losing money on right now.
Right.
For meter replacement and everything else.
Right. Yeah. And the other part of the equation was, whether to cover those costs for the remediation, the litigation through inter-utility loan, or to try to recover that through costs. That's kind of the other factor that was driving the costs, was to do it through rates.
Monogram and Essentia couldn't hook up to REC8, could they?
That's,
They have REC Electric, but they, I believe Essentia has talked to Regional Water, but they don't have the water supply available. And so I don't believe that they'd be able to serve either one.
yeah, this isn't as much about being competitive with a competitor, it's about
Right.
making sure that we don't have a negative economic impact in the city.
Exactly.
I don't think anybody wants to lose jobs. So
No.
we certainly want to get our biggest customers in on this discussion, so at the very least they're aware of what's coming, so.
Because that is,
Yeah. I would like to know where we are as far as having that discussion with them and.
Yeah, Coburn, I know you were working on that. What was the latest date for the meeting with Essentia?
The 16th,
June
June
16th.
16th.
And then we haven't set up a separate meeting with Monogram, but we can. So.
I think I really do believe that's very important. And not just to make an adjustment of that magnitude without having a conversation, so.
So I would recommend before we have that meeting, we go back and revisit those two items. What are we doing?
Yeah.
Why are we raising the rate? And those two items that we're raising the rates for, we need to make sure we factor those in. And that may adjust these rates down and then have the conversation and not have an alarmist kind of skies falling kind of conversation with it, if that makes sense.
Go ahead, any further discussion on that today? All right, we'll move on to item number 7, which is the operations and maintenance plan for the gas operation.
Coburn, you just want to hit the highlights on that if you would, please.
This is a new O&M plan that was written by the HMU. It's the operator's manual, the emergency manual, and then the procedures manual. It's a whole new book for our gas operations. And we just need to get a board approval for it, and then that'll take effect or adopt it. And then that'll be our new go-to for all of our operations, daily operations.
You've read it, I assume?
Actually, I'm on the gas committee, and
You helped
we were
write it?
one of them I was up there for 2 days working on it with them.
Okay, you're
So,
satisfied, obviously.
Yes, it is really, it's state of the art. And the Iowa Utility Board, they adopted it as well, and they were the big push for it. Because our old manuals didn't have procedures, so this new one has procedure from starting to finish on every task we do in the field.
Okay.
So,
Anything that you see that's going to raise our costs significantly?
well, everything's going up, everything.
Well, right.
I mean, as far as the equipment, anything like that, we already have the equipment to go with the O&M.
Okay.
So it's just more specific.
Absolutely, it's spelled out, and, I mean, you guys could read through that manual, and you
Yeah.
guys would be able to do that
It outlines
task.
any trouble or anything
Yep.
is identified and what steps to follow and all of that.
It's like 900 pages
Thanks.
with the 3 manuals.
It's huge.
So,
That's why we have people like you.
it's really good, and they spend a lot of time on it.
Is there enforcement of procedures in there? Is that something Eric's gonna do?
Through the state,
Yeah.
through the federal. yeah.
Absolutely. IUB checks on all that stuff.
But it's basically an update to our existing op plan, so.
Have you read it, Joe?
I scanned through it.
You're but you are familiar with it, right?
Yeah. I mean, like you said.
Because we're writing checks now that you're in cash, right? So,
Well, I'll make a motion that we approve the new operations and maintenance plan for the gas.
Roll call?
Michelle, I.
Terrell, aye.
Seibert, aye.
Reset.
Sheldon, I.
Okay, item number 8, information only, and McClure invoicing amount of $16,320.
Yep, that's ongoing for previously approved work.
Okay. CEO's report.
Okay, we had our all-hands meeting yesterday morning, reviewing the board agenda and other items with staff. A few kudos. First of all, we received a kudo for telecom staff and CSR techs. May 16th was the Municipal Telecommunications Day, and so we just want to recognize our telecommunications staff this month. We had a kudo for Jess from the customer who was having some internet problems. For the board's information, we have negotiated an agreement with a couple of ex-employees to provide some on-call support for our electric department. As you're probably aware, our working foreman, journeyman, Dean has had to go in for back surgery, so he's going to be out for 6 to 8 weeks. And that left our single journeyman on call all the time. And so to be able to support him a little bit in not only on call, but also in the case of emergencies, we're paying a stipend basically for a couple of our ex-employees to make themselves available on an on-call basis. They currently work for NIPCO. We've talked to their management, worked out agreements with them, and so they'll be working in support of Steve in the electric department as long as Dean's unavailable. So just an FYI to the board. Also, we had a meeting with McClure back on May 16th, basically for an update on the raw water development project. And what we found out at that meeting was that although USDA had given us preliminary approval for our water project, the funds actually were not released by the federal government until May 14th, which for whatever reason, it was a weekend. So those funds are now available, and so we're still waiting for our letter of conditions from the USDA to start our water project. But the engineering's done. We have our permit from the city, which we're working to change the address. It had the old address versus the new address, but that's a minor issue. But we're just waiting for the go-ahead from the USDA. The one additional condition of this funding now is that it's Build America and Buy America, which means that all of our materials and supplies acquired for this project have to be made in America. And until we get to the bidding process, we won't know what the availability or cost will be based on inflation and the supply chain issues. So that's kind of a big unknown for us right now. So,
What was the dollar amount on that?
pardon?
What is the dollar amount available now?
Well, the preliminary number is still around $4.5 million. But like I said, until we get the bids, we won't know what the actual number is going to be. So.
Yeah, my question is, they made funding available. How much have they made available? The federal government has written a check, right?
No, they haven't written a check. They're
Oh.
still waiting on the letter. They will.
Oh, I see.
The way it works is they issue a letter of conditions, basically approving funding for our project. We have to arrange interim funding with local lenders through the construction process, and then at the end, the USDA writes a check after the project is completed. And that commitment for funds initially was $4.5 million based on the final materials, estimates and stuff that come in through the bidding process.
But until we have that letter, we can't even go to
The interim.
the interim letters.
Correct. The other item, just an FYI, something that's just come up in the last day or so. If you got some funky emails from me, it was a spam. My email was hacked again today, so you may have gotten a Dropbox email or something to that effect. That seems to be what most people receive. So we still fight hacking on a regular basis, and so we work through that as we can. The other item, just information to the board, general information. Another thing that came up today, and we'll make copies available to anyone who's interested. somebody called with a question. They'd heard a story on NPR about summer blackouts. And what's going on are several factors. You know, summer blackouts are not a new issue. They've been going on the West Coast for a number of years. We've been fairly fortunate here in the Midwest. They've been going on down in Texas, southwest part of the country. The cautionary note here is that with the continuing decommissioning of coal and nuclear, the backup gas supply in the summer for peaking is primarily natural gas. And natural gas has gone up almost 3 times what we typically are faced with in the summer. And so the question becomes whether economically gas will be able to fill that gap this summer. So it's more of a cautionary note than anything else. You know, nobody can predict the final number, the final weather, or anything like that. But the additional factor this year is it seems the entire country, basically everywhere west of the Mississippi, is being hit by drought. That does impact our hydropower source through WAPA. It also does put more reliance on wind and solar. And for anybody that's lived in this neck of the woods, everybody knows the dog days, July and August, the wind just doesn't blow very much some days. So there's just, it was a question that was raised. Like I said, it's been on NPR and others talking about the potential for it. But I just wanted to bring the board up, give you a little bit of information in case you get wondered about it or somebody asked about it. You have as much information as we have. So. With that, any questions or anything?
So I do have a question. So
yep.
WAPA, you know, their 15% rate increase that's forecasted for next year. So WAPA is a federal organization.
Correct.
So I guess, and that information came to us via McClure, correct?
No, that came directly to us. We have a WAPA contract. So.
Okay. Yeah, so, you know, it's a federal organization. There's been Build Back Better, all kinds of federal funding that's been dumped into infrastructure. So really it's, I don't know why we're just taking that 15% uninflation related cost increase. So I would offer that whether it's through the IAMU or back through the elected official channel, somebody needs to go back and say, listen, this is, in the current economic situation, a 15% flat rate increase is not something that is, it defies logic because of the federal government's spending, and it's just not economically viable. So I go to the city and I ask, you know, does the board think that we should just take that rate increase without providing pushback of some way, shape, or form?
And you're gonna push the federal government back?
No, I am not. I think there's, so WAPA covers almost the entire western United States.
Yeah.
It's a rate increase of 15% across the entire western United States. So I think we should be providing it back up through the city, back up through the state, and then back up through the federal government to say, you know, why wasn't WAPA available, or why didn't they receive funding like every other federal agency for upgrade, maintenance, modernization, and then why is that being pushed down to the ratepayer or to the municipal utility? I mean, I think that is one of our roles, maybe, or responsibilities, is to represent the customers as an in-between or go-between when things come down.
Okay.
What are your thoughts, David?
There are certain fights that you can fight. I don't know what the channel would be. I know to go up and talk to somebody at WAPA and say, we demanded you We're not in any position to bargain with WAPA. That's not the kind of organization that is, we're not buying a used car, so I don't know that there's a negotiation factor, and like you said, it covers the entire western half of the United States. I hardly think Harlan, Iowa is going to show up on their radar, but
Yeah, I think it's not us going to do battle with WAPA. It's us informing the folks that influence the federal government, which are elected officials all up through the state and Congress, to have them at least be informed that this is happening and that it will have an adverse effect on our customers, everyone else in the IMU regions, and then across multiple states. So I'm not suggesting that Harlan goes and tries to do battle with WAPA. I think at some point we just need to make sure that we're not just a pass-through for rate increases.
Well, it'd be nice if we could just go talk to them. We can ask them about the gas prices while we're at it. Well, it's $4.19 a gallon.
obviously there are some economic challenges that we're all facing at this point. So if there is options out there that can help, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
I mean, we can communicate our concerns to, you know, our congressional representatives and that type of thing. But being a federal entity, they basically set their own rates, and I'm not sure that our only avenue would probably be through FERC, filing with FERC or something like that. But there's only a handful of municipals that buy Waffle Power. We buy it individually. The other ones that buy it do it through associations, Missouri River Energy Systems, and the or other agency organizations such as that. Primarily on the western fringe of Iowa are the ones that are involved with the WAPA. But we can still contact IMU, who represents all municipals across the whole state, to see what ideas they might have. I mean, we can communicate our concern. I'm not sure what other avenues at this point we might have. So.
Yep. To me, I don't know where the city sits on this. I mean, you know, if this is a point in which the utility and the city, because none of us are elected officials, last time I checked, you know, which should become something that the city champions on behalf of not just the utility, but the customers. So I just bring that up as a potential value of us being able to sit here and see things coming that will adversely affect our customers.
If we can ascertain the course of action or proposed course of action, the board's on what it is.
All right, anything else? Yes, sir.
I just want the board and the citizens of Harlan to know we're conducting our 5-year gas leak survey the week of June 13th to the 17th. Hopefully the weather cooperates. We'll either be in 2 different golf carts or UTVs. We're going to try to label them, HMU signs on them, and make sure that the guys are wearing their HMU hats and stuff like that. So just to let everyone know that we'll be driving up and down alleys, streets, and stuff like that, conducting the leak survey. So, that's it.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. We are adjourned.
Okay.